Okay, good day. We're learning Kuntres U'Maayan. We're about to start the 11th chapter, Maimer Yud Aleph, on page 169. But before that, we'll review briefly on 167, the bottom, the Kitzur summary. Bisman haba yesha Yisrael shleimim mikayim b'kiyum atayro mitzvahs, during the time of the Beis Hamikdash, when the Yidden were complete in their fulfillment of mitzvahs and the study of Torah. The Yidden had a tremendous amount of material good. In addition to them being blessed with godly spiritual energy and light. The contrary is the opposite is true during the time of Golus. Because of our Yisrael, because of the transgressions of the Jewish people, they are low, they are humiliated. Nevertheless, the verse says, and it's the Zohar interprets it to read it, in all of our sorrows, in all of our problems, difficulties, Leitzar, Hashem is also bothered by it. Why? Because when a Yid and Yidden have issues and problems, Shemagia b'pnimius, it touches the core of Hashem. So Hashem is also bothered. Like they tshuva miyumka deliba. And through doing tshuva, from the depth of your heart, not from the external part, but really deep within inside, where you really regret it. You arouse the pnimius within, and it comes forth, and it shines, and it brings good again. Top of 169. Now remember that this has been a continuum of 6 Maimurim, beginning with 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, actually 7 Maimurim. And so now we go to the chapter Yud Aleph. V'zeu shekosuf, this a posuk, vayizaku b'koil godol el Hashem. They cried with a great voice to Hashem Elokeim, their God. Seemingly this verse needs clarification. Ma'u inyin keil godol, what is this idea of a loud, a great voice? Our rabbis, our sages say in Gemara and Brachas, if someone shouts during Shmon Esrei, that individual is amongst those that have little belief. What do you have to shout for? Hashem hears you. Someone who raises their voice during Shmon Esrei, the Gemara says they are amongst the false prophets. Upeirush Rashi explains that the Chsiv, as it says, Vayikra b'koil gadol, they called with a great voice. Vayikra b'koil gadol. Where is this verse? Malachim, right? Hold on. If you look at note 218, this verse in Malachim that they called with a great voice refers, it says in note 218, which refers to false prophets. So when we're calling with a great voice, we're joining, that's what it means. We're joining what? We're joining the false prophets. In other words, because in the Pasuk in Malachim, there were false prophets which called to Hashem in a great voice, and they were false prophets. So when we call Hashem with a loud voice, we're emulating those false prophets. That's what the Rashab is saying. He's putting together the Gemara and the Rashi and our context. Umikol Mokai. But the Rashab says, wait a minute. Isn't there a time in the Jewish life cycle to raise your voice in prayer? Then we are accustomed to raise our voice. Ukemesha Kosova, Beis Yosef, Beirachayim, as the Beis Yosef says in Beirachayim, chapter 101, over Sefer Mogen David, Lehadrat Baz, and in the Sefer Mogen David to Rab David ben Zimra, Zechrein Levrocha, his test, Kosov Zel Shoinel. Let's see the quote. V'hinei, Eidiacho Inyan Nifla, I will apprise you of a wondrous thing. Something wondrous that I understand from the words of the sages. Anything that comes out of man's mouth, nirsham ba'avir, it is nirsham, roshem. It is what? Mark down. Yeah, okay. An impression. An impression.
Is this an indirect reference to Carlin Stolen?
We'll talk maybe about that later. Yes and no. Okay. Because we'll talk about that later. I don't know if we'll talk about it. We'll see. Let's for a moment just get this computer here. Okay. So let's continue the Gemara, the Chazal here. So whatever comes out of a man's mouth is nirsham ba'avir uvokeya kama avirim u'rekiyim, and it splits many heavens and atmospheres, v'oila l'mayla, and it ascends upward. Im teva yosherhu, if it's good things and proper, v'yetze b'kedusha az makrivim oisim l'fnei misha amav ra'yolam, then it is brought before HaKadosh Baruch Hu said and created the world. That's why Yidden have accustomed themselves to shout, to scream, to cry out to Hashem, afatzara, l'kreya b'koel godol, lasas reishim, godol v'yiboko avirim, to make an impression and to split the heavens. Ad kan l'shoinei. No, so this would be a source for Carlin Stolen Hillel. That's what it says. Right? In other words, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur is the time during the year for such tefillah. But the truth is, if you're experiencing the middle of the year a Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur moment, and that's where you're coming from, it's fine. Okay? So we could say that the Carlin Stolen idea, philosophy is to work on experiencing this Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur moment every tefillah, every day. That's their mahalach. That's their approach. You know.
I find it very interesting that the Rashab talks about this, because this is not the Chabad derech.
Well, wait. Let's see what he says. The Rashab is talking about it in the context of he mentioned earlier, right? What we learned yesterday about screaming to Hashem. That's screaming. When you're in pain, it hurts. You cry to Hashem, right? So once he mentioned that, he says, wait a second, let's now look at this whole issue. And you're correct, Yoni. I mean, it's very interesting to see how he will deal with this issue, because this is so much opposite the Chabad way. The Chabad way, and in fact, I'm going to talk a little bit about it to Hashem on Thursday at the Fabrengen about the Mittler Rebbe. The Chabad way was not outward emotions to the point of flaring up and shouting up and screaming up. Of course, if someone is in pain and we're talking about as a derech, as an approach, that was not the Chabad way, and that was one of the reasons for the dispute between the Mittler Rebbe and his former best friend, Rabbi Aaron of Strashela, which we'll leave for Thursday. We'll talk a little bit about that. Hare, let's go to the next paragraph. Hare chilik dilepomim. Says the Rebbe Rashab, what do we understand from this Chazal? That there's a difference. Sometimes you have to shout out with a loud voice. And through this, Moshe, you make a big impression. That's what it says. It's amazing.
This could also be a klal in parenting, right?
We can bunch everything into everything, you know. I wouldn't say that screaming is a good klal in parenting. But let's go further.
If you're by nature quiet, and if your voice is very moderated, when you raise your voice, it makes a big impression.
Yes. And like I told you the other day, like my wife always says, you have to know that when you're talking to men, that's more passable than when you're talking to women. So it depends on where and who and what. But yes, you know, a voice is, you know, look, you have some speakers, and you know, that they're very monotone and low, and there are people that gravitate to that and like that. And then there are other people find that very boring. They want a very charismatic and dynamic and you know, and with a lot of drama. Everyone, you know, it depends. It also depends sometimes, like I told you, living in Marin County, which is a bedroom community to San Francisco, I could fall asleep many times. It was so quiet. You can hear the deer during the day. You know what I'm saying? It was, and on one hand, that's gewaldige, restful peace. But sometimes coming from Brooklyn, I don't have to tell you, coming from the city, Chicago, Baltimore, you know, it's a lot of noise and everyone, you know, and so I needed like a high. So I just got in the car and I drove to San Francisco to hear a few cars beeping, see big buildings, and then visit a few people and turned back around and went home. Saying everything depends on the situation. Or like sometimes, no kidding, years ago, I would go into the Karlin Stolen and Chapat Tefillah. Not just because, you know, of the timing and then whatever, but because it, you know, their energy is so unbelievable that it really gives you a wake up, and sometimes you need that. So it depends on the situation, and that's what the Rashab is saying here, that there is a time and place for Vayitzaku. There is a time and place, but let's see how he develops this in his Chabad Hasidic thought, okay? Because we're not learning, you know, Musar, we're not learning Medrash, we're learning Chabad Chassidus. So obviously, how does he tackle this whole issue? So first he sets it up where he gives us the Talmudic issue with the Gemaras and the Medrash and the Rashi, and now he starts giving you Chassidus. Yes, Moshe.
Rabbi Dalvin, can I just ask you a question?
Sure.
Do you think that the Rebbe Rashab, do you think when he says call like a Rosham Gadol, do you think, excuse me, the Kol Gadol, do you think that he means literally shouting, or do you think that he's speaking, we've been speaking the last few minutes about like Karl Stalin and so forth, but is that what the Rashab is even speaking about? Is he speaking about physically, literally?
Yeah, because that's what the Chazal say. Kol Gadol means literally a loud voice. It doesn't mean, you know, maybe screaming the way the stoners scream, where they bend down to get air to pump it out, okay? No, that not. But loud is loud, yeah. That's Kol Gadol. That's and that's a pasuk in Tanakh and a Gemara. So that.
Right. So I just want to say two things. Number one is the person Kol Gadol could be not lavdafka physical, but your entire being is focused, like laser focused in your tefillah. That's one thing. But the second thing I just want to say is the pasuk in Malachim. It's speaking about like immediately after the Kol Gadol. It's like, and they cut themselves after their manner with knives and with like lances till the blood gushed out upon them. In other words, it's sort of like a little. I'm just wondering.
Moshe, first of all, the Kol Gadol that he begins with this paragraph is from Nehemiah, not from Malachim. Look at the beginning. Look in the English. Great voice in prayer. This is. Yeah. They cried out in great voice.
Right. So I'm looking at the next one. The second.
That's what it begins with. The second one was just the support that they were called Nevi'eh, because he says you're like the false prophets. The question is, they're not prophets. We're talking about regular people. So that's where he brought in the second thing. But the actual reference to the Koil Gadol goes back to the first pasuk in the opening line of this chapter, Vayizaku bekoil Gadol al Hashem, from Nehemiah. Let's continue now. Third paragraph. He says, when we talk about words are revelation. There's a pasuk in Yeshaya, it says, Asa Boker, morning arrives. What's the word for arrives? Asa. Asa and Osios, Yoni, are associated. You can hear it, right? Osios and Asa. Before morning, it was dark and concealed. It's the idea of the night. And when the light comes, which is morning, the verse says, Asa Baiker, the morning came, the illumination came. So what do we understand, Yonis, in? That the idea of Oisios is illumination, Gilui. Before I go further, is that clear, Moshe? You sure?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
In other words, thought, I don't know what you're thinking about now. I mean, I could surmise, but I don't really, right? When you speak with your mouth, which is using words, I hear you because you've revealed your thought, or part of it. It's a revelation. It's an illumination. It's morning. It's bright outside. Let's continue next paragraph. Says the Rebbe, since there are various sorts of revelation, for example, the revelation of pleasure, the revelation of will, the revelation of intellect, the revelation of the emotions. Shehem, next page, 171, Giluyim atzum l'fierach musam. These are revelations of the radiance. These are very powerful revelations based on what they are, on their essence, on their mahus. In other words, when intellect is working, there's a revelation of intellect. Right? This morning I was able to write. I got up early. I was thinking to myself how much my head is so clear, Baruch Hashem, in the morning. It takes me so much longer during the day to write the same thing because I'm farjavit. You know, Java means rusty. Why am I rusty? Because the day with the phones and this and that, and even though I'm here myself and it's quiet, but still, in the morning, it's shh, right? Everyone has their mornings. For other people, it's at night. But what's my point? The point is that when seichel, when the mind is working, you feel like clarity. It's illuminated. And another person, when he does a chesed, when he helps another yid, he feels so elated. His midos are illuminated. Another person, when his willpower is in full force, he's supreme. And finally, a fourth person, when he has pleasure, whether it's from a hot mikveh, going on a cold day into a hot mikveh or a hot tub and saying, I'm a chaya, and he has pleasure. That is a form of revelation. Okay? Then there's also the radiance of the neshama. You understand? Look, everything that we said till now, Hillel, seichel, midos, rotzain, and tainuk, Yoni, right? Are all talking about in the physical world. What do you get pleasure from? What's your willpower? All, right? I want to paint today about Moshe Rabbeinu, right? And you get to the studio and you start doing that, you get pleasure from it. But so it's all in the Gashmistic world. Says the Rebbe Rashab, there's also pleasure associated with the neshama, with the soul. And that pleasure is when our instruments of thought, speech, and action are illuminated. are working properly. You're thinking, speaking, and acting properly. All manifestations are a revelation of what we call oisios. Okay, so we're now, you need to understand this, please. The word osios used in Chabad Hasidus refers to revelation. Okay, Hillel? So we're not talking now just about words. We're talking about revelation. And a substitute word for revelation in Chabad Hasidus ideology and philosophy and teaching is oisios. Okay? There's a Maimer, Hillel of the Alter Rebbe in Likutei Torah, Parshas B'Shalach. If you want to know more about it, you can find over there, all of you, more information about it in Parshas B'Shalach, right? But this is what he says here, that the oisios represent Gilui, revelation. Next paragraph. Ukeshem shebois haksav. Now you have letters written letters. Hali bechlolos say gimel mini oisios. You have three types of letters: large, gedolos, beinonis, medium, uktanos, and small. Moshe knows this from being a cipher. Asher b'sfiras el yoinois. What are these three oisios in terms of the supernal emanations, the spheros? Hein bedargas chalukos. There are three separate levels. Kemaimer, and we say the Kemaimer asvan ravrevin b'sfiras abina. Large letters are where Hillel in the bina. Asvan beinunin, middle-sized letters b'sfiras zo are in zeir ampen, which is the middles, the 6 middles. V'asvins v'zeirin. And the small little tiny letters, B'sfiras HaMalchus, are encapsulated in the last of the 10 spheres known as kingship, royalty, Malchus. Harei, Masha ha'ois nichteves gedoyle yoiser. The fact that a letter is written larger than another letter, more, this denotes shehu b'bchinas elyoyne yoiser. It denotes that it is greater, afsha kol tmuna achas, even though it's all the same, one identical shape. Look at note 220, please. Let's read that. That is, although a given letter may appear in a larger size at one point, it is still the same shape as recurrences of this letter in regular medium size. So it is its size that indicates its category rather than its shape. Clear? Let's see what he says further. So the Rebbe uses this to understand voice, sound. When we say a loud voice, this great voice indicates a higher category. Shehula Mailu Madrega, that is very great. Vahainu, the Heimil Mailu Lamata, whether it be from the perspective of heaven downward. Ukumei b'Matan Torah, the Chsiv, it says by Matan Torah, v'koil shofar. The voice, the sound of the shofar, chazak mioid, was very strong. Uksivin, it says in Devarim, referring to Matan Torah. What does it say in Devarim? Koil gadol v'lo yosav. It's a voice that's unending. So whether it's from the perspective of Hashem, who sounded his voice at Matan Torah, and it was a unending to the voice because it was so powerful. Vehain, back into the text. Milmata l'maylo, from our perspective to heaven, from below to above. Ukamoi, now this quotes the Nehemiah Pasuk again. Moshe vayizaku b'koil gadol, we Jews shouted with a koil gadol. Uksiv, and it says in another Pasuk, in Yonah, V'yikru Elokihim b'chazaka. They call to Hashem with might. No, regarding the situation over there, right? There was the trouble with the whole story of Yonah. So it says they call to Hashem b'chazaka. The koil gadol magia l'mayla yosef. What do we see? That the concept of a koil gadol, it reaches higher. Lefi shu mipnimius halev. So you see Moshe, what he's doing here? He's not refuting that it wasn't a koil gadol. He's telling, but he's focusing us. Where did this koil gadol come from? Pnimius halev. The cry, the shout is when it hurts. You shout, right? So the more it hurts, the more you cry, the more you shout, the more you scream. It hurts. I'm in pain. Since the issue at hand touched him very deep inside, that's why he screams b'koil gadol. So Hillel, this I think might also address your earlier point. We're not just talking about here, external shouting, and I don't mean that if someone doesn't mean it. We don't mean someone says, "No, I'm going to shout now. I'm going to dance. I'm going to make with my hands and feet." No, we're talking about, like Moshe said earlier, which in content is right. The person is the mindset. In my mind, I'm in great pain, and that great pain generates the voice. So it is. So that's what I'm saying. That I'm trying to reconcile what you said, Moshe, and what you said, Hillel. And what I'm saying is that indeed it is a koil gadol, but the koil gadol is coming from the pnimius halev. So now what's left is, wait a second, so the Rashab still has a question, Yoni. And this goes back to your question. Wait a minute. So is it genuinely acceptable to scream during davening? Let's see what it says. The Gemara says, and it's brought down, Jonas, in the Shulchan Aruch, that someone who shouts during Shemoneh Esrei when it's supposed to be called a silent Amida, and you shout, it shows you don't believe God can hear you, so your emunah is katan. Katanei emunah. And that's a chazal. Shahatam hu. The Rashab says. And the reason why, Kipirish Rashi is like Rashi says, and he quotes Rashi. Kilu eina kodesh baruch hu shomea tefillah lachash. It's like the person saying, God doesn't hear my silent prayer. Umakbia harbe, and therefore I have to raise it. I raise it loud and loud. The gam shalei levav v'lachedim. Another reason Rashi gives is, hey guy, don't confuse the person next to you by your loud voice. Everyone is silent, and all of a sudden you're loud. I remember, I think we had this discussion 2-3 years ago. Definitely in the Koil. I forget who it was, but there was someone at Eish Kodesh. A boy, I don't, you guys should remember those that were around those days in Eish Kodesh, and he would shout so loud. Maybe he still does. And I remember, I think it was Ron. Ron came over to me and said, Rabbi, how do we get this guy to quiet down? Yes, you understand.
Well, I lived in Beit Bar for a while, and there was the Carlin, they connected next to the Chabad, and I used to daven there. They were davening so loud, I had to turn my hearing aids off. That was the only way I could daven there, and even then I could hear.
Right. Okay, and again, it's a Gemara and a halacha. V'gam shelo levav v'lachedim hamispalalim. You shouldn't be davening loud during Shemoneh Esrei to be mavalvel others. Some say, well, move away. It's not what it says here. It says, it's called silent Amida. You don't have to whisper, you want to say, but like normal, like a mensch, Let's continue. Kol zehu b'stam tefillah. says that Rashab, that all of this, of the Gemara and Rashi and the Halacha is true when it's ordinary tefillah. There has to be silence, Shmanesrei, Amida. Avol based tzara, but at a time of a tzara problem, then is the time when we're looking to identify within the inner nekuda, the inner essence, at that time, we need to find our quintessential neshama that's bound to godliness. He bechol adam bizgalus b'emunah pshuta b'Hashem eisafela, that is always revealed in its own right, believing in God with simple faith, who is the wondrous creator. Look what the Rashab says. V'hatam de bilbul ha'cheirim, and the reason for not davening loud that we mentioned earlier, because you're confusing, you're being mevalvel ha'cheirim. Gam kein ein shayich. When you're in the mode of tzara, that doesn't apply. Oh, when you're standing with a deep inner arousal coming from the depth of your heart, and you're crying because of that, it awakens and it arouses others. In other words, no one will complain. Now, you might be thinking, no one will complain, really? We're talking about anyone that is cognizant of Chazal, anyone who's cognizant of what's going on. When they see and when they hear a person who's crying from the depths of their heart, and I think you all know this, I've seen this at Kfarim, you melt away. By the Rebbe's cave, I'll give you an example. Usually it's very quiet. It's quiet, right? Several times I've gone, I've heard a man or a woman crying, a mamish. And, it's like, so you say, it's being mevalvel, it's not being mevalvel. It only evokes deeper feelings of tefillah and HaKadosh Baruch Hu standing at the tzaddik's caver. At least that's the way I take it. I'm not at all mevulval from a yid who's he or she, even a she, who's crying from the depth of their hearts. And that's what the Rashab is saying here. When Halacha says, don't daven loud and don't scream in Shemon Esrei because you're being mevalvel, we're talking about a normal situation. But when we're talking, in other words, what does mean normal? When it's coming from your mind and your heart. But I'm saying it's calculated. Then Halacha says, please don't interfere, don't disturb another person's tefillah. But if it's coming from a person's deep heart, all the rules and regulations don't apply. It's a different plateau. That's what he says. And the Rashab says, then there has to be a tzaika b'koil gadol. So now he adds a nuance, Moshe, which is interesting. He's saying, Yoni, that it's not enough for it to be a silent. It should protrude. It should permeate all aspects of your being, which comes out through tzaika b'koil gadol. And we've seen this too. We've seen people who normally are very quiet and passive, both in their personal life and their prayer life, and all of a sudden they bust out with a tremendous emotion. I mean, I saw it with the Rebbe. I saw it many times with the Rebbe. The Rebbe was, if you saw the way the Rebbe Damish Minesra, you can see it on videos. So he's barely moving, right? He's like, he's so calm, right? And that same Lubavitcher Rebbe, when he would speak about Russian Jews or about Mashiach not being here, he just couldn't continue talking many times. So And the answer is, there is the normal talk, which is from here, and then certain things touch you so deeply that comes from the inside, where there's no rules and regulations, and on the contrary, if you give it out, not that you hear Ratzon, I'm going to say a tefillah, I should give it out. That's false. It happens because you're so engrossed in tefillah where it touches you. That's the whole idea of, tears. And again, when I'm talking about tears, we're talking about that too. But we're talking about the idea of tzaka. Tzaka. And I think, Hillel, this is really the true equation. I don't care what Hasidus you're from, or what Litvish, what Sephardic, for a Yid. If what you're doing is coming from that Nakuda. Now, you could say that maybe in the Karlin Stolen ideology, they say that by practicing this, it will enhance your tefillah. Okay, so that's already a Hasidic custom that only they and those that follow them believe, and most others don't. But and that's it's not that they're and also let me say it clearly, because we shouldn't make a mistake. I don't believe they're doing that in the silent Shemon Esrei. Right? They're not screaming at the top of their lungs. It's by Chazaras Hashatz when they're answering Baruch Hu Baruch Shemai or other tefillos. They're very loud. But here we're talking about specifically the silent Shemon Esrei. Let me just finish the paragraph, and then if you have any questions or comments, we'll discuss it. And he says, top of the next page, 173, those are the days of the year which are set for us to arouse our inner core and essence, as it says elsewhere. And it's interesting. You correct me if I'm wrong, but my recollection is, I don't have the sefer in front of me, that there is a halacha in the laws of Aseres Yemei Tshuva not to daven too loud to disturb. I think that it might be brought there also. So it's interesting because the Rashab is saying here that what period of the year has been set for this type of tefillah to awaken and arouse your neshama, the Aseres Yemei Tshuva. So you understand. So on one hand, the halacha is saying you should not disturb someone else, and at the same time, we're learning that that's the time for such hisaydus, such a arousal that comes from the depth, which expresses itself b'kol gadol. It's like many other things, and I've told you this, the vort of the Kotzker. The Kotzker Rebbe came into the room, and his son was sleeping with a chavrusa there, and they were going to miss Shema, and he kind of scolds his grandson, get up, what are you doing? And usually he was up earlier, so he leaves the room, and the friend turns to the grandson of the Kotzker, and he says, when my grandfather gives me musar, I don't hear musar, I hear honey, sweet honey, and I want more and more and more. It's the perspective. It's the perspective. In other words, let me put it this way. Let's be honest with ourselves. If our best friend is standing next to us and carrying on and screaming and making noise, and I'm davening, are you going to really tell him off? No. But if it's not someone who you know, or someone who you know but you really don't care for, even if you don't tell him off, but up here you're thinking this is a chutzpah. In other words, it's where you're coming from. It goes back to what Moshe was saying before. It's where are you coming from? And that's what the Rashab is telling us, that when Chazal talk about this idea, Chazal and halacha is the category of do and don't, right and wrong. It's a predetermined category of reward and punishment, right? So it has to give its ruling, which is what it is. Don't disturb someone. But when you enter a domain that transcends rules and regulations, rights and wrongs, because you're talking about neshama, it all falls aside. It all falls aside. Now, that doesn't mean that if you are I remind myself of a story. It's a story really for Yutas Kislev when we talk about Hasidim and non-Hasidim. There was a Chassid. His name was Reb Zalman Moshe Hayitzchaki. He came from Rashi's lineage. And he was a sheikhet in Nevel. Nevel was a little village or city, I believe, in the Ukraine, I think. And it was somewhere. And Lubavitch had a very stronghold in Nevel. I was once told by someone who came from Nevel, they had, I think, 16 shtiblach. 11 or 16, I forget now. A lot of shtiblach. So it was really a Chabad, town. There was also Litvish and others, but Chabad was a prominent force, or maybe the prominent force in this little town called Nevel. And the Zalman Moshe was a sheikhet there. So Bekitzer, he came, and then later he lived in Kiev. And in the shul in Kiev, the Rav was a Litvak. His name was Rabbi Kaplan, I think. And a big Talmud Chacham. And a real, a Yid. And it was Yutas Kislev. And the Hasidim in the shul, because they didn't doubt, they invited Reb Zalman Moshe, this Chassid yet from the Rebbe Marash's time, I think, and the Rashab, to Farbrengen. This is talking about in probably the 20s, the 30s, To Farbrengen, he was the elder Chassid. Fine. Before the Farbrengen, we daven Ma'ariv. Because, later on you're going to say L'chaim, it's late. You daven Ma'ariv before, it's always better, healthier. And he starts davening Ma'ariv, and they come to Shemon Esrei, and he sees the way the Rav starts davening Shemon Esrei and carrying on like a good Litvak, okay? Shaking and making with his hands and with his face and kvetching, you all know what I'm talking about, right? And Reb Zalman Moshe, the food was already on the table, and in those days they ate herring, but the line, the big herrings, not the. He quietly, I guess he was before Shemon Esrei, he quietly takes a herring and he throws it at the Rav's face. After Shemon Esrei, the Rav says, he wipes himself off and he says, who did this? And they point to this guest Farbrenger, who they didn't know. And he goes over to him and he says, why did I deserve to get a herring thrown at me? So he says, it's because it's Yutas Kislev tonight. We're celebrating the Alter Rebbe and Hasidus, the Baal Shem Tov. And you're davening like a masnagid. I couldn't take it. And you know what the Rav said to him? Please forgive me. That's even a greater punchline in the story. And he meant it. Because he was a very humble person. He understood where Zalman Moshe is coming from. Zalman Moshe was not into throwing herrings into people's faces. But he understood that where he was coming from, here he was an invited guest to inspire everyone to Chassidus. And someone is displaying to him the opposite of Chassidus, okay, that he couldn't take. Not on Yutas Kislev. Any other day, before or after, I can tolerate it. But tonight, no. Yes, Hillel.
If you ever write that story up, Rabbi, I got a heading for you. You could call it herring impaired.
It's a sensitive story. You have to know when to say it, when not to say it. I'm sharing with you because it's the month of Kislev, so it's already a lively month. But I'm saying it also b'kesher to what we're learning over here. There's a time and place for everything. That's the message. That's the message. You know, that's the message. So in other words, there could even be, like we had a discussion earlier this year, someone who cries in shul on Rosh Hashanah at the same place at the same time. And it's disturbing. For some, it's very disturbing. I assume for him, this is what he knows, and this is what his comfort level, and this is the way he serves Hashem. This is the way he was raised. So I understand where he's coming from, yet it could disturb others, and this is always a balance. So the best thing I think is to be sensitive, be kind, and not look at others, look at ourselves, and that we should. When we daven with kavanah, and if chas v'sholem it is a tzara. I remember, I'll end with this. When the Rebbe wasn't well, he had a stroke and he wasn't feeling well. We lived in LA in 92 and 93 and 94. Rabbi Ezra Shochat is the Rosh Hashiva of the Lubavitch Yeshiva, and Reb Tamcha Levine was very good, close to him. And Rabbi Shochat, you know, his father learned in Tells. He's a genius. He learned in Prisk and in Lakewood. And he became a Lubavitcher, you know. And my wife always remembers how he would say, and we said Tehillim for the Rebbe. He mamish was crying. On a regular Monday, a Wednesday, a Thursday. Mamish saying Tehillim in the middle of the week, crying. And it was amazing, you know, because no one else is crying. We're saying Tehillim. It bothers us, our Rebbe. And here is this Rosh Hashiva who's kind of more of a Talmudist. And he's melted, you know. And he meant it. There was not even a question. So it's all in the perspective. There's no one that was in that base medrash, I think. There was no one there who said, hey, Rabbi Shochat, stop with your games. This wasn't a game, and if you observed it and listened to it, you saw he wasn't pretending. He was saying Tehillim, but by him, the Tehillim for the Rebbe being ill was so deep that it just evoked these emotions. Chevra, we will learn tomorrow. Hashem, I think was a good discussion, and we'll learn tomorrow. B'simcha. Zaygas to everyone. Have a good day. Take care. Bye.